Welcome to the Fuel Pump Power Wire Upgrade Guide for a 1992 to 2000 Honda Civic. We will walk you through how we upgraded the power and ground wire to our 1996 to 2000 Honda Civic. This may also apply to other Hondas as well. Before starting any work on the electrical system, be sure to disconnect the negative battery terminal from the battery. Parts required for this include Civic air conditioner/heater blower motor power wire and connector from a donor car, 12-gauge red and black wire, relay harness, high-temperature electrical tape, ring terminal, fuse holder, heat shrink, and soldering iron and solder. During this installation, you will need a battery power wire connection for the fuel pump relay. We have a pre-existing 4-gauge wire power source that we will tap into, located in the trunk. In this case, a 4-gauge power wire and appropriate fuse will also be needed. A smaller gauge wire, such as 10 or 12-gauge wire, can be ran from the battery. Make sure to use an appropriate fuse rating for the wire size that you use. We use the power wire boot from a donor harness, but you can use the boot from your car's harness once the power wire is cut. This donor harness gives a visual of what the harness looks like after it is disconnected from the pump and sending unit. Remove the fuel pump power wire connector from its boot. It has a yellow-green and a black wire and is attached with electrical tape, which will need to be removed. The vinyl protective sleeve will also need to be removed. After that has been removed, pull the connector from the boot. Instead of repinning the original fuel pump connector, we used the climate control blower motor power wire, which has the same connector, but with thicker wires already installed. Here you can see that the connectors are the same. You can get this blower power wire from a donor car at the local junkyard. We made sure to clean the connector with rubbing alcohol and a brush. To protect against corrosion and dust from the outside elements, we will need to fill the connector with dielectric grease. First, we will fill the rear part of the connector. Feed the connector's wires through the boot. Fill the front of the connector with dielectric grease. Wrap the wire and boot in high-temperature electrical tape. Since the fuel pump power wires will need to be longer, before we install it in our vehicle, extend the wires using a soldering iron. The blue/black wire on our connector is the positive side, so we used a red wire. The blue/white wire is the ground wire side, so we used black wire. Cover these connection points in electrical tape or heat shrink tubing. Before we remove the fuel pump cover, remove the electrical tape and the plastic shroud that covers the wires and attaches them to the rubber grommet. Remove the 4 fuel tank cover screws. Pry up on the cover to remove it. This exposes the 3 electrical connectors to the fuel tank. For ease of maneuverability of the access cover, remove all 3 connectors. First, remove the 6-pin fuel tank pressure sensor sub-harness. Your vehicle may not have this. Next, remove the 2-pin connector from the fuel pump. Last, remove the 3-pin fuel level sending unit connector. Feed the power and ground wires for the new fuel pump connector through the underside grommet of the access cover. Remove the tape from the original fuel pump power connector boot. Cut the yellow and black wires toward the bottom of its boot. Reattach the 3-wire connector to the fuel sending unit plug. Make sure to cover the plug with its rubber boot. It is a tight fit with the other connector in the way. To help, press on the sub-harness connector's mount clip, then slide it off its mount. Reconnect the fuel pressure sensor sub-harness connectors, then slide the connector back onto the tank mount. Reattach the fuel pump connector to the fuel pump. Make sure to securely cover the connector with its rubber boot. Slide the sleeve off of the original pump power wires, then slide the wires out of the top of the boot. These will be used later to power on our upgraded relay. Before closing the access lid, make sure the wires are properly positioned so that they don't get pinched. Replace the 4 screws to secure the access lid. Now we will need to connect the required wires to the relay and harness. There are 2 sides to this relay. Pin 85 and 86 uses a small amount of electricity to turn the relay switch on or off, controlled by the original fuel pump power wire. When the relay is turned on, pin 87 and 30 will allow power to flow to the fuel pump. Pins 30 and 87 are normally not connected if no power is across pins 85 and 86, as shown on the relay diagram. This diagram shows which wires we will connect to the 4 relay pins. Pin 86 will be connected to the yellow factory fuel pump power wire. Pin 85 will be connected to a chassis ground. The factory black ground wire can be used, but we will use a new ground location. Pin 30 will be connected to the thick positive battery power wire. Pin 87 will be connected to the positive fuel pump power wire. Our relay harness has a total of 5 wires, but only 4 will be used, the blue, yellow, white and black wires. Listed on the screen is how we will be wiring our harness. If you use a harness, the pins may be color-coded differently. Double-check how the wires on your harness correspond with the numbered relay pins. One thing to note is wiring the harness ground wire, which is pin 86 on the relay and harness, and the fuel pump black ground wire. We will crimp these to a ring terminal, then bolt that to a clean chassis ground behind the back seat cushion later in the video. We will now begin soldering the relay harness to the factory wiring, the fuel pump, and the battery power lead. Here we started soldering the yellow factory fuel pump power wire to the pin 86 wire, the white harness wire. Twist the wire together, then solder the wires using a flux core solder. Make sure to place heat shrink tubing onto the wires before they are soldered together. Slide the heat shrink over the solder joint and heat it so it securely shrinks over the joint. Do not attempt this with any part of the fuel system open to the inside of the cabin, as the vapors may catch fire. If using a flame, make sure to have a fire extinguisher readily available. We followed the procedure for the rest of the wires on this chart. One critical thing to note is connecting the blue wire of the harness, pin 30 on the relay, to a thicker battery wire. We ran a 4-gauge power wire from the battery, through the firewall, and into the trunk to a distribution block. If you run a dedicated wire or tap off of a source like we did, it is essential that a fuse, rated for the wire current capacity, is placed as close to the battery terminal as possible before it goes through the firewall. We installed a 125 amp fuse at the battery terminal because it is 4-gauge. If you install a smaller gauge wire, you will need to find the correct fuse rated for your cable carrying capacity. At the distribution block, we installed a fuse holder with a 20 amp fuse, which runs directly to the blue wire, pin 30 on the relay, because we stepped down to a 12-gauge wire at that point. We installed the fuse holder as close to the distribution block as possible. This is how our circuit is laid out, going from the battery, through the fuse before the firewall, distribution block in the trunk, through the 20 amp fuse, through the blue wire, which is pin 30 on the relay, then finally to the fuel pump wire, which is connected to pin 87 on the relay. If you run a single cable from the battery such as a 10 or 12 gauge wire, instead of a thick cable that steps down to a smaller wire, your circuit will look like this. From the battery, to the fuse before the firewall, the wire ran to the rear of the car, to pin 30 on the relay harness, then pin 87 to the fuel pump positive power wire. We will now mount the relay. The relay should be securely fastened to the car, but in an accessible location. We will align the relay to the support mount, and mark where the center of the mounting hole is with a Sharpie. We aligned it toward the edge so we can easily use a wrench on the 10 mm nut, for the backing of the 10 mm bolt, that we will use to secure the relay. Use a drill bit to drill through the support mount. Use a bit that is slightly larger than the size of bolt you will use to secure the relay. If the plastic relay housing has a smaller mounting hole than the mounting bolt size being used, use the same drill bit to enlarge the mounting hole. Insert the relay mounting bolt through the relay mounting hole, and the mounting hole that we drilled. Use a matching sized nut to attach to the back of that bolt. Use a wrench on the backing nut, while using a socket to tighten the bolt to the support. Secure the fuel pump wires with plastic wire loom. After the wires are inserted, wrap parts of the loom in electrical tape. Wrap the ends of the loom in electrical tape as well. This is optional, but we used wire clips to secure the wire assembly to the body of the car. You will need longer screws if you use the gas tank access lid to secure the clips. Now that the wires and relay are secure, we need to reinstall the rear seat cover, crimp the ground wires to a ring terminal, then secure the ground terminal to a car body ground. The body ground that we used is used to mount the seat cushion. To make sure we have a clean ground connection, use some sandpaper to expose a clean metal surface under the paint. Crimp the two ground wires, for the fuel pump and the fuel pump relay, to a ring terminal, then wrap the terminal end in tape. Install a lock washer between the ground wire terminal ring and the clean metal body ground point. Insert the bolt through the seat mount, the terminal and lock washer. Tighten to ensure a good electrical contact. This shows the relay has plenty of clearance once the rest of the back seat is installed. If there is ever a problem with the relay, this location will allow easy servicing without having to take out the whole back seat again. Just flip the seats down and lift the carpet up.